So recently I started watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the first time in my life, and I just caught up to part 4. So obviously I'm guessing y'all want to know what I thought about part 4. The title should be pretty self-explanatory. Diamond is Unbreakable, the best JoJo's part. So far, of course, I haven't watched part 5, I haven't watched part 6, and I hesitate saying that part 4 is my favorite because part of me recognizes that recency bias is a real thing. I always like giving decisions like this a little bit of time to see how I feel down the road once the recency bias is wore off. But as of right now, I just got done watching the Kira fight. It's the best. This is the best JoJo's part. I liked it more than part 2. I liked it more than part 3, of course. And then by extension, part 1. I mean, just talk about excellently executed. Part 4 was amazing. The art style, the colors, the sound designs, the characters, the stands, the openings, the villains, the fights, everything about part 4. I don't think that there was one weak spot about part 4. And I guess it's funny that I say that because part 4 reminds me so much of part 3, far more than it reminds me of part 2. And people thought that I lambasted part 3. I really liked part 3, but I criticized it a little bit because I pointed out stuff that I would have liked more about part 3 had they gone about it in a different way, had they done it differently. And it feels like almost all the critiques that I had about part 3 was addressed in part 4. And I'll get into all of that, of course. The first thing I want to talk about is why part 4 reminded me so much about part 3. I suppose it was mainly the formula. I mean, my biggest problem with part 3 was the fact that there were so many stand fights, and it felt like part 4 had almost an equal amount of stand fights, but the way that they go about it is different. I mean, we've all seen JoJo's, right? In my opinion, the part 3 stand fights, it was like, here's a stand user, defeat him, move on, go to the next stand user, never hear from the past stand user again. Boom, now you're on a new stand user, defeat him, move on, never hear from him again. And it wasn't all stand users. There were a couple of them that were reoccurring characters, like the old hag that was with Dio, Whole Horse, but majority of them, 1-2 episodes, never hear from them ever again. In my opinion, somebody commented the perfect description about it where they said you can skip a couple episodes and it feels like you missed out on nothing. And I feel like that's true. The Polnareff baby fight, if I would have skipped those 2 episodes, come back right after the fight, I don't think I would have missed out on any crucial information about part 3, honestly. I think I probably would have liked part 3 more if I skipped that fight. But part 4 is very different in that regard. Part 4 does have a lot of stand fights. I say fights very loosely, by the way. A lot of these weren't even fights. But again, we'll get to that. Part 4 has a lot of stand users that show up as antagonists. You know, very similar to part 3, but the one minor thing that part 4 does differently than part 3 is make them important to the story. It's hilarious. Something so simple is enough to make the sheer amount of stand fights go from annoying at times to one of my favorite aspects of part 4. Most of these stand users were actual characters. They got actual writing. That alone gives so much more depth to the characters in part 4 than the ones in part 3. Because most of the antagonists that popped up in part 3, they didn't feel like they were actual characters that were meant to be fleshed out. They felt more like vessels for a stand. And that one difference elevates part 4 so much. So many characters that get introduced as antagonists first go on to become a part of the crew, or at the very least return in a couple episodes down the line to help the crew. It gives the characters personality, it gives the part personality, it gives the town of Morioh personality. And I'll talk about Morioh because the setting of part 4 is also one of the strongest points, but that's why I like the stand fights in part 4 more than I like them in part 3. Another reason why I like the stand fights, I hinted at this earlier, they don't really feel like fights, not all of them. Feels like a lot of stand users and stands are built in a way that encourage world building, that encourage exploration, that encourage other means of defeat other than brute force. Cinderella is one of those stands, for example. The episode with Yukako and Cinderella, not a stand fight. I mean, they're both stand users, but Cinderella is really just being used in a cosmetic sense. And I liked how part 4 showed that stands can be used just by everyday people doing their everyday tasks. We can highlight the brilliance of the stand power without it being a fight. It doesn't have to be some 1v1. You know, Shigekio is just using the stand to win some money. Rohan uses his stand to write manga, although, you know, morally questionable. Tonio uses his stand to cook. It makes the stands feel more integrated into the world. And again, it gives personality to the stand users because the stands and the way that they are used offers insight as to what the character is like and what the character enjoys. I think that's one of the strongest part about JoJo's power system, by the way. Absolutely been loving stands, and I can't wait to see more of them. But going back to something I said earlier, I wanted to talk about Morioh because I feel like this is one of the major reasons I like part 4, and it's so different from part 2 and part 3, yet I love the way that they handled the setting in part 4 despite being so different. different. In a sense, we visit a lot of different places in part 4 in the same way that we visit a lot of different places in part 3. However, the difference is in part 4, all the places that we visit are in the town of Morioh, whereas in part 3, we're visiting a whole lot of different countries up until we arrive in Cairo. So we're visiting a lot of different places all the same. The difference is part 4 is on a much smaller scale. You know, one of my biggest disappointments with part 3 was, oh, we're gonna visit all these different places. I can't wait to see the world get fleshed out. But a lot of the time, the world building was hindered by the fact that we had so many stand fights and it interrupted the world building, and by the time we were in the next country, the last country we visited felt half-baked. Whereas in part 4, since we're operating on a much smaller scale, by the time we finish part 4, it's like we visited so many different places in Morioh that I grew fond of Morioh, I grew fond of the people of Morioh, and I don't want to leave Morioh. And after finishing part 4, I hope that future parts 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 handle the setting the exact same way as part 4, because I loved it. It leaves you with one entirely fleshed out town, and although it is on a far smaller scale than part 3, I liked it a whole lot more than part 3, 2, and 1. Just one small town, but it feels like we visited every nook and cranny of Morioh. I guess that's just one of the things that makes JoJo's feel so eclectic, I guess. There's different parts with different styles and different aspects that make them unique, but at the end of the day, all of them feel like JoJo's, and I can't blame anybody for having any one of these parts as their favorite. Part 3 is your favorite? Makes sense. Go ahead. Part 2 is your favorite? Makes sense. Part 1's your favorite? Makes sense. They're all great. It just feels like personal preference. I guess it's like pick your peak viewing experience. But while we're on the subject, another thing that's different about part 4 from every other JoJo's part is of course the art style. By the way, I think part 4 looks great. I think part 4 is the best looking JoJo's part, but the art style was immediately recognizable. I think the biggest thing being that all the characters had been slimmed down. You know, the characters in part 3, 2, and 1, especially 1, looked like they were on 500 milligrams of straight Trenbolone and Turkesterone. But I mean, part 4 did something right. Again, the most visually appealing part in my opinion, especially the colors. Oh, Morioh was such a beautiful looking town. But I digress. I think we should talk a little bit about the story, because wow, was part 4 good, especially when I had no idea the direction that it was gonna go. You know, keep in mind, we're just coming off of part 3, which sees us presumably, at this point I don't even know, it's Dio, right? But Dio's dead. Dio's dead. So I'm like, who is going to be the antagonist of part 4? I thought maybe it would be similar to part 2 where the antagonist isn't Dio, but is a result of something that Dio caused. Because you know, up until part 4, Dio has had his fingerprints on everything so far. But no, the main antagonist was Kira. And I can't wait to talk about Kira, because I have some takes that I feel like are scorching hot. I have some pretty strong opinions about him. The good kind though. I thought Kira was a great antagonist. Bad person. Horrible person. Not a good guy. I wouldn't invite him to my house, but a phenomenal antagonist to say the least. But before I even get to Kira, I feel like it's only right to talk about, you know, the actual main characters. Starting with Josuke, who is so hard for me to rank. I guess it's something that I never thought of, but now that I'm 4 parts deep into JoJo's, I started giving it more thought. I'm like, do I have a favorite JoJo? Like, which one is my favorite? I mean, I always thought it was gonna be Joseph. I love Joseph, but then I finished part 3, I was like, Jotaro was great as well. So it was between Joseph and Jotaro. Jonathan was a fair bit behind them, and then we get to Josuke, who for the longest time I thought, okay, it's pretty clear where I rank Josuke. He's the 3rd best. I didn't find him as enjoyable as Jonathan or Jotaro, but I liked his personality and his character more than Jonathan, so I thought, okay, 3rd is the perfect place to put him. Or so I thought, because then we get to the final like 5, 6, 7-ish episodes, you know, when we really start to crack down on Kira and everything is falling down on him, and Josuke has peak moments after peak moments after peak moments. I'm telling you, Josuke during the end stretch of part 4 went from being my 3rd favorite JoJo to sitting comfortably in his throne at the #1 spot. It's not even easy making that decision, because as somebody who just started watching JoJo for the first time, I didn't know how I would like the concept of having a different main character every part, because I'm like, what if I don't like these main characters? All of them have been great, so that's not even a concern. It's like the same thing with the parts. Since they're all great, pick your peak. It's all up to personality at the end of the day. A decision like this would be a lot easier if there was like a weak link that I could point to and be like, yep, that's easily 4, that's easily 3, 2, and 1. But I would say Joseph, Jotaro, Josuke, all 3 of them are so peak, but right now Josuke is my #1 guy. So if I'm gonna talk about Josuke, obviously it would be right for me to talk about his stand. This is the 3rd stand that we see from a JoJo, and it does not disappoint. Of course, the ones beforehand are Hermit Purple from Joseph and The World from Jotaro. Definitely better than Hermit Purple. Is it better than The World? Now you're asking a little too much of me. I can't answer that. But it was definitely one of the best utilized stands I had seen in the series so far. Stands are inherently a unique power, and they're very creative in nature. And I think that Jotaro's Crazy Diamond is a stand that was was used the best by their user. We saw Crazy Diamond used in a plethora of ways that I wouldn't have even fathomed. So Crazy Diamond is able to rearrange the structure of anything it touches. So we see this used to like create homing missiles, track Kira down, reassemble an enemy's own attack and fire it back at them. Like, we see this stand used so creatively that I don't think any other stand has been used as well as this one. And now going into part 5, I hope the stands are handled the same way, because Josuke did use Crazy Diamond Master, and a stand that is used correctly intrigues me more than a stand that is used incorrectly, even if I like the ability more. And I'll talk about that right now, because funnily enough, Okuyasu is like the exact opposite of everything I said about Josuke. He might be my least favorite JoBro. JoBro is such a stupid term. I love it. Worst is such like a strong word because it makes it seem like I don't like the character. I didn't dislike Okuyasu. I was just more indifferent towards him. I did feel like he had an epic stand and we didn't get to see it used to its full potential, because the hand is like the type of stand that you would give to the final antagonist of a part or to the main character, and they gave it to Okuyasu. And Okuyasu's whole thing is that he's too stupid to realize the potential of his stand, and it's unfortunate because it really is a great stand, but I suppose this just highlights that it's not the stand that makes the character. I mean, Joseph has a pretty weak stand. He's still an amazing character. And while we're on the subject of Joseph, another member of the main is he a part of the main cast? Definitely didn't get a lot of screen time in part 4, but we find out that he's the father of Josuke. So it creates this weird dynamic where Josuke is Jotaro's uncle despite being younger than him. You know, Joseph, you dirty dog. And one of my favorite parts about Diamond is Unbreakable is seeing Josuke struggle with the fact that Joseph is his father. And Joseph hasn't really been in Josuke's life, but up until now, Josuke's life has been great, and he doesn't want to have his peace disrupted, so he almost doesn't even want to meet up with Joseph. It's actually a shockingly real and hard-hitting storyline, and it's why I like Josuke more than Jonathan, but we don't get too much of it. We only get it for a couple episodes. Of course, the two eventually meet and Josuke is accommodating towards Joseph. But yeah, you know, interesting family dynamic. I said it was one of my favorite storylines throughout part 4. That's true. But obviously my favorite storyline of part 4 is the whole finding out Kira murder mystery situation. Now, I've said on my channel multiple times that I love anime that deal with mind games in the human psyche. So I was absolutely enthralled by this storyline from the second it kicked off, which was the first scene of episode 1. But the meat and potatoes of it really kicks off with the death of Shigechi, which is sleeper one of the saddest deaths in JoJo's. You know, like high 9 out of 10 episode. And Kira's shown to be a stand user. Kira's shown to be a cold-blooded killer. And up until this point in part 4, we had a couple villains that were more on the minor side. They were really only there for a couple episodes. You know, maybe they come back and make a reappearance in a future episode, but they weren't the antagonist. But Kira proved why he was the antagonist. First of all, top 5 stand. I don't think there's a stand in JoJo's that had as much personality as Killer Queen, which is funny how JoJo's is able to give so much personality to a power system that doesn't speak. But I kid you not, Killer Queen was a downright scary stand. So I'll tie this back to part 3, because when I talked about part 3 and the majority of the stand fights, I said that they were very low stakes because you knew that nobody would die. Killer Queen is the antithesis of that. Every time the Killer Queen popped up, you knew that death was on the table for one of the main characters. And I loved that. I lived for that feeling in part 4. Kira is one of the handful of characters that really made you feel like anybody of the main cast can die at any moment. The stakes are always high when he's on screen. Tension was always running. So I love Kira for that reason, and they did a great job with the stand. 10 out of 10 stand. Killer Queen is epic. And another aspect of part 4 and Kira that I loved as well was his home life after he transformed. First of all, that episode where he managed to get away and use Cinderella to change his face, 10 out of 10 episode. That episode subverted my expectations because I was like, wow, they're really about to catch Kira halfway through part 4. Maybe he's not the antagonist, maybe he's not the main villain. And then he managed to get away. Reoccurring character. It just showed you that every stand user introduced was meaningful and deliberate. And I love that. But his home life after, you know, with Hayato and his wife, you know, very ominous seeing it play out. Also, some of my favorite moments in part 4 was just watching Kira interact with that family as if he was part of their family, if you get what I mean. But of course, we know how it pans out because Hayato was on to Kira, and that whole end stretch of part 4 where it was Hayato versus Kira and Hayato trying to find ways to find somebody that could defeat Kira. All of that was cinema. You know, this of course leads us to the final fight with Josuke, but not not before getting a little dose of Bites the Dust. So Kira hits Hayato with Bites the Dust. Hayato finds Rohan, tells Rohan, right? We all know this. Boom, Rohan dies. Now we're trapped in a cycle where Hayato keeps repeating the same morning. Loved it. You know, I'm just coming off of ReZero. It was the last anime I watched before JoJo's. And the looping, the problem solving of trying to figure out how to change the loop reminded me a lot of Return by Death. But with Bite the Dust, the difference is, you know, fate stays the same. So even if you change or affect the loop, Rohan's already dead. Like, he's gonna die. So I love that as well. I know I keep saying, oh, I loved it, but JoJo's part 4, cinema, and Hayato realizing that he's gonna have to kill Kira with Stray Cat. Now the Stray Cat stand is another facet of JoJo's that I'm absolutely fascinated in, especially when Killer Queen combined with Stray Cat. I already thought stands were unique and cool enough as is, didn't even think about combining them. Of course, the question raised is like, are there gonna be other stand combinations in part 5, 6, 7? I don't know. I'm hoping so, because I thought it was epic. But in this loop, Hayato managed to call Josuke Okuyasu up, and now they're gonna be the ones to deal with Kira in what is my favorite part of part 4, my favorite segment of part 4. And I may have alluded to this earlier, but Kira versus Josuke is my favorite fight of the series. Yes, above Dio versus Jotaro. Might be a scorching hot take. You guys might not like it. It's my opinion, right? It's complete. But we had so many amazing moments. Josuke cutting the bubble with blood was a hype moment. Okuyasu coming back after I thought he was dead was also a pretty hype moment. You know, up until this point in the anime and JoJo's, majority of the time, the side characters, they start dropping towards the end, right? So I thought Okuyasu was dead. Subversion of expectations. Loved it again. But my favorite moment in the series, yes, in all of JoJo so far, him in part 4, Josuke with the phone in hand, pretending to be Kira's father, with the bomb bubble in his face. Cinema. Peak, goosebumps. I don't think I've ever said that about anything ever. It gave me goosebumps. The awareness, the swag, the aura farm, the deception, the killing the main antagonist's father with the main antagonist's own attack, all of it was poetry in motion. I'm telling you, in this Kira fight alone, Josuke stock went to the moon. And I got diamond hands. See what no pun intended. You know, we saw Joseph in part 3. We saw Jotaro in part 4. Hoping we see Josuke in part 5 or 6 or something later in the future. I want to see my goat back. That's it. That's all I want to say. I just can't get over this fight. I can't get over this part, honestly. Part 4 is a part that I can really see myself rewatching in its entirety. The ending to part 4 was obviously just as good as every other part of part 4. You know, with Kira trying to activate Bites the Dust. For a second thinking that he succeeded. I knew something was a little bit off. Turns out he had died. I love what the opening did with Bites the Dust. First of all, I think Chase is the best opening in JoJo's. Just had to throw that in there. And I saw the openings, you know, with the time rewinding and the opening playing in reverse. I see now why people tell me to watch JoJo's openings. I understand. But yeah, we're led to believe that Bites the Dust activated and it worked. And he came face to face with Raimi. His death was one of the best moments in part 4 and extremely well written as well. I love the way that they handled it. And since part 4 does a good job in building up great side characters and a great town, it almost makes you feel like the death of Kira is not just a win, it's almost like your win as well. I don't know, I was just completely hooked by part 4. Everything about it. The best fight, the best moment, the best JoJo, the best setting, and the best part. So I don't want to say too much. I'm on to part 5, I guess. Hope it's just as good as part 4. If you liked the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and Diamond is unbreakable forever. Take care, y'all. Peace.